Okay, let's go ahead and get started. This is the second webinar for hosted by McKinley Caregiver Resource Center. And I would just like to introduce our Mills Director, Michelle Johnson.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Michelle with McKinley Mills, located within McKinley Caregiver Resource Center, based out of Snellville. McKinley Mills is a home delivery service that we offer to help relieve some of the stress and everyday burnout with our caregivers. We kind of started that during the difficult times of COVID. Our caregivers were at home with our participants that had to stay at home to keep safe. And they were having to cook a lot like all of us. And so we knew we had to do something to help our caregivers, So during that time, our chef that's been cooking for them for the last 12 years prepared meals, and we delivered them all to the families with activities to help keep them engaged. And so that is when our McKinley Mills was born within our Caregiver Resource Center. But thank you for joining us today. Today, I'd like to introduce Linda and David from Five Forks Library here in Gwinnett. Hi, Linda. Hi, David. It's so nice.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. It's so nice to see you both again. You all have did this for our participants in the past, and we all as staff really enjoyed it, and a lot of the families took home information that day. I remember us running out of packets, and I started making copies to pass along to everyone. And so we're really looking forward to it. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, you ready to get started? There we go.
Would you like to do an introduction or?
I'll send that to you. Do you want to read that?
Yeah.
My bio. Yeah.
1 second. Can you guys still see the presentation? Okay. So are you guys seeing my email right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you mind doing the presentation then?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I can speak a little bit, just a brief bio. It's not the one I have written down, but I started doing genealogy in probably the early 1990s. And there wasn't really much on the computers back then. The internet was just starting to come about, and there were a few websites that had message boards where people would try to each other and pass information along that they had been picking up over the years, and family histories they'd learned from relatives. So it was just in its infancy then. And I had to drive down to the archives in Atlanta about once a week or two, and go out to cemeteries all around the Southeast to do research that way. And after a while, I kind of found everything I could doing it that way, and just kind of lost interest in it for a while. And when I started working here at the library a couple of years ago, I realized they had Ancestry.com on the computers here for free. So I just got on and decided to see what was on the internet about genealogy now. And there was so much on there. You can just go to census records. You can look up anything on the internet now. So I got interested in it again, and I've really probably doubled the size of my tree in the last 2 years, just doing research that way.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say that David is a wonderful asset to our team because he consistently does book-a-librarians, which we'll talk about a little more later, where he's helped people one-on-one learn about their family history, and he's just our resident expert. All right.
Okay, go to that one there. Why is family history important? Learning about your ancestry, it connects you with your past, your present, and your future family. You can discover where you came from, the struggles your family's ancestors went through, how they overcame them. You can learn more about your family's traditions and cultural practices. You can keep them alive, enriching your own family's experiences together. And finally, you can pass down what you learned to future generations, so the knowledge is preserved and isn't lost forever. Go to the next one. Okay, how do you get started doing family history? A great way is just to come down here to the library and talk to one of us. You can ask for me personally. I'm here every day of the week, just about. First of all, you need to start with yourself. Just get a piece of paper, write your name down, write your parents' names down, then write their parents' names down. Any other information you need, their birthdays, death dates, who they married, and then you can start branching out, like who they married, who their family was. Just try to fill in as much as you know yourself. Then the next thing you want to do, go to the oldest members of your family and start trying to branch the tree out further. It's real important when you're talking to older members of your family to try to ask them about any stories from the family, because once they pass, those stories are lost forever. Around the time that I started doing my family history, almost all my grandparents had already died, so I lost out on that chance to get all that family history, and there's lots of questions I have now that they easily could have answered, but I'm having to try to do it through research now. So always ask older family members as much as you can while they're still around. Then also look around your house, see if you have an old family Bible. You might ask some of your older relatives if they have a family Bible or if they know who has one. Usually the family Bibles will have a genealogy page in the front with all the marriage dates and names of kids. Sometimes in the Bibles and in the older books that you may just have laying around from family members, you'll find little scraps of paper, letters that people have written back in the 1920s, 1930s, old newspaper clippings, funerals, obituaries. Sometimes if you look at old photos, you'll find names and dates written on the back. All those can be clues, and then you could ask people like, who's this person in this picture here? Or who's this, what's this name I found in this letter that was stuffed inside this book? So just look around your house and just see what you can find. All right, so when you're beginning your research, you need to be organized. I'm not the most organized person in the world. I don't like using spreadsheets and family group sheets, Excel files, things like that for genealogy. But what I do that's worked really well for me, I just opened up a word processor file, and I just start every single thing I find, every fact I find, like a birth date or a marriage date, census records, anything like that, I put them chronologically by date. So you might find that your ancestor John was born in 1830 in Louisiana, so you'll just write 1830, Louisiana, John's birth information. 1840, he was in the census. Here's his wife and kids. 1847, he got married. 1850, they were in the census in a totally different state, so somewhere in between there they moved. And when you tell it like that, it's almost like a story, and you can start trying to piece together information. When you start looking at census records, which I haven't got into how to do that, but that's something you can do here at the library. Like I said, we have ancestry.com. We have Heritage Quest, which is another website that has free census records on it. I start looking at those households around your family. Once you find your family in there, back in the 1800s, back before the 20th century, people didn't move around much. So you'll have several generations of family and extended family all living in the same community, usually within just a few households of each other. So you make note of them, all the people within maybe 5 or 10 houses around. And sometimes you'll find out later that those are actually relatives too. All right, go to the next one. There's one on verifying information, or was that a?
Oh yeah, that was the last one.
Okay, yes, a note on there, no new slides. So anyway, verify your information. I can't stress that the most. That's the biggest thing I run into doing my own research is other people will just copy things without verifying it. Especially like on Ancestry. Like if you're on Ancestry and you're looking at historical records like census records, marriage records, things like that, those are just what they are. They're more than likely accurate. Where you want to be careful is where other people have put their family trees on the internet, and they could have done really good research, or they may not have done good research. They may just found, I know I found somebody named John Jones here in the census record, so that has to be him. But you don't know. It could have just been someone with the same name. you just run into that kind of stuff all the time on the internet. So always do your own research. If you shouldn't disregard anything you see from other people. Just treat it as a possibility that this may be what I'm looking for, and then do your own research. Try to figure out how that person come up with that information. Anything that doesn't have, like say if somebody says, I know that John Jones married Jennifer Smith on a certain date, 1857. If they don't have a reference for that, saying where they got that information from, you should treat it as suspect until you can find it out yourself. It could be true. It may just be something that doesn't even have a record. It may be something that they copied out of an old family Bible. But you don't really know until you start looking. And like I said, sometimes you'll find out the information is just totally wrong. So always do that. Census records, they can be as accurate as the person giving the information and as accurate as the person recording the information. Just think like sometimes if a census record taker came to the house back in the 1800s, maybe most of the families out working in the fields, and more distant relative is the only person in the house when the census taker comes by and he just talks to them. Maybe they think that the father was born in Alabama, but he was actually born in New York. You don't know. You don't know if the information the person gave to the census taker is accurate. Once you actually start doing research, you'll find a lot of times that the information changes from census to census. That's very common for names to be spelled different because people didn't really have set ways of spelling things back then. The name Kennedy, in some of my own research, sometimes it's spelled the way you would think with a K, sometimes it's spelled C-A-N-A-D-Y. Usually on Ancestry and some of the other search engines, they have a phonetic way of looking up the names. So if you type in Kennedy, it'll find out the various spellings for you automatically. But sometimes the spellings can be so off that you'll miss them unless you actually try to think yourself, like, what's a weird way somebody could have spelled this? Birth years often change from census to census. Birthplaces change. One of my favorite examples about researching things, even tombstones can be wrong. My own great-great-grandmother died in 1902, and I know this from probate records. She died in 1902. Her husband got remarried in 1903. They sold her property in 1906. So in the cemetery, though, her tombstone says she died in 1907. And about half the people on the internet that have her in their tree have that as her death date because they've never dug back into the probate records. And the only theory I can come up with why that happened is they were just poor farmers out in West Georgia, and they sold their property in 1906. So they probably didn't have enough money for a tombstone until 1907. And when they gave the information to the tombstone carver, the 2 probably looked like a 7, and he was probably just thinking, why would somebody put up a tombstone 5 years later? And he just figured it was 1907 and carved that in there. That's the best guess I can come up with. But so don't trust anything, even primary sources like headstones. Another reason headstones can be wrong sometimes is a lot of times headstones are put up by modern family members. You'll see that a lot. People do family history research and they find out that their ancestor was in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, or something like that. They'll get a special commemorative marker and put it up with the information. But that's only as accurate, again, as the person doing the research. If they found the wrong ancestor in there and the person really wasn't in the Civil War and they copy down all their birth and death information, then that tombstone's wrong. So always look at that too, see if the tombstone looks like a more modern one with nice sharp carving in it. Let's see, we already went over the trees. Okay, we can go to the next slide now. So these are some resources we have available at the library itself. Ancestry Library Edition. Do you know if that's available at home now while the pandemic's going on?
Not, unfortunately not.
Yeah.
But people can come in and access it, or they can actually come into the parking lot if they're not comfortable coming into the branch, and just park out there and use our Wi-Fi to connect to it as well.
Yeah, so that's the only one that normally you have to be in the library to use. That's just part of the stipulations from the Ancestry company. They don't want too many people using it at home since they have a paid subscription service for it normally. But I do have a paid version at home. It runs, I think, when it's not on sale, it's probably close to $200 a year, probably. And you can come in the library and get probably 80% of the information that's on there for free. About the only thing you wouldn't get is if you did your DNA and you're looking at your cousins and you're trying to see their family trees to see how they match up, you can't get that on the library edition, but almost all the records are on there, though. Digital Library of Georgia. I usually don't find too much in that. You have to have Georgia ancestors, and they had to have done something that made a newspaper or some kind of historical document. Sometimes they have weird random photographs from small towns that'll have people in it or homes that people lived in with a name attached to it. So sometimes you can find things in there. I don't normally, but it's always worth a look if you have Georgia ancestors. The ebooks on EBSCOhost. EBSCOhost is a service that provides reference works to libraries around Georgia. And they do have a huge ebook collection on there, and there are some genealogy works on there, histories of families, histories of counties, things like that. Gale Virtual Reference Library, I believe that's real similar to the other ebook thing I just talked about. Galileo, it's sort of similar to the Digital Library of Georgia. They have a lot of Georgia resources on there, historical works, old newspapers, which I've actually found some good stuff in that. They have it broken up into different parts of the state. And some of my relatives were from Northeast Georgia. And you can go in the Northeast Georgia newspapers and just type in a name, and it'll take you to all sorts of articles that have that name in it somewhere. Most of the time, it probably won't be your relative unless they have a really odd name, but it's always worth a look. I've found some good information on there. Found out like my great-great-grandfather was killed in a bridge collapse up in Forsyth County back in the 1880s, I believe. And they had all sorts of details in the article that made it really interesting. GCPL Guides, that's just a page in our catalog that shows you all the resources, and if it's some kind of digital link to any type of genealogical resource, it'll take you right to it. It also lists some books that might come in handy that you can put on hold in our catalog or just come in and browse. Now, Heritage Quest is a really good website. That's like a scaled down version of Ancestry, and I believe it's actually owned by Ancestry. And that is available for free at home. All you have to have is a library card. You go into our website through it. It's done through that Galileo service I just mentioned, and it'll ask you for a Galileo password. Somewhere on the right, you just click Get Galileo Password, you type your library card and PIN number in, and then you can get into the Heritage Quest, and you can access census records, slave records, Freeman Bank records, some military records, I believe, on that one. Yeah. Master File Elite, that one's slipping my mind at the moment. Is that?
That one's pretty similar to the EBSCOhost one.
Yeah, it's like ebooks and things like that. They also have magazines on there, which are totally unrelated to genealogy. But if you need a consumer report, you just go right into that master file there. You get access. New Georgia Encyclopedia is going to be kind of similar to the Digital Library of Georgia. It has a lot of articles about Georgia history. That one, I think, unless you got a fairly famous relative that did something with the state legislature or was a famous explorer, early pioneer, you're probably not going to find anything in there. But yeah, it's just like everything else. It's worth a look, though, because you never know. And Oxford African American Studies Center, or anything have to do with African American history, slave history, slave censuses, and how that kind of information was recorded. You can find a lot about that in there.
David, I have a question regarding the Freeman Bank records. What is the use of that particular resource in Heritage Quest?
Freeman Bank records are for African American heritage. After the Civil War, the federal government set up these Freeman banks where African Americans that had just recently been free could get bank loans. And they're really handy if you can find a relative in there, because they wanted to make sure that they could give you a loan and you'd pay it back. So they wanted to know all your relatives' names, where they lived at, how old they were, things like that. And you can punch it in the name and you'll just find this whole list of, like, my sister was Bobby Sue and she lives in Atlanta and she was born in 1865. And It's just a whole list of things like that, and it's really handy. You don't find that kind of same information in a lot of other resources.
Thank you.
Okay, these are free sources that aren't particularly related to the library. It's just things you can access from home easily. None of them have subscription fees. They're all just completely free. I got kind of in the order of where you should start at when you're first doing research. Find a Grave and also billiongraves.com are real good resources on cemeteries. Most of the cemeteries in the United States are 80 to 95% counted, where people have gone through and copied all the information off a tombstone. And you can punch in your ancestor's name and find a grave, see a transcription of the grave, of the headstone. A lot of times they have photographs of the headstone itself. And they also have a feature where relatives can put in information that they know about the people. So sometimes you can even find out what people say are that person's parents and grandparents and kids and the dates they were born. Like I was saying before, don't trust that information. Just note it down as this is something I should be researching. It's probably true, but let's verify it first, though. And like I said, Billion Graves is real similar to that site. But Find a Grave is a better website, in my opinion. But I believe Billion Graves is outside the United States, though. They have a lot of cemeteries in Europe and things like that, too. So both of them are different. FamilySearch.org, that's another really good website that's real similar to Ancestry. If you're sitting at home and you're like, oh, I wish the library was open so I could go play around on Ancestry right now, just go on your home computer to Family Search. They have a lot of the same information for free. I believe you have to set up an account, but it doesn't cost anything. You just put your email and make a password, and they'll let you in. And they have things that you can't even get on Ancestry. Like Ancestry makes you pay for military records now, even if you have a separate account. Like I do at home, I have a paid account, but I don't pay for the military records because it costs, I don't know, like an extra $30 a month or something. You can just go on FamilySearch.org, and they have all those same records for free on there, so you don't even need to pay for it. Family Search also has where people put in their family trees, and something I just learned about it recently. I didn't even know about this until someone told me about it on Facebook. Was on Family Search, they have a whole collection of things that haven't been indexed yet, which means that they may have probate records or divorce records from some county, and you can't search them by name yet because no one's gone through and pulled all the names and information out, but you can still browse them on there. So it may take you a while to go through them, but sometimes there's things there that you may have to drive 3 or 4 states away and just sit in a county courthouse and just browse it the same way anyway, just page by page. So you can just do it for the leisure of your home on here. And most of those records aren't on Ancestry. So that's another really good resource. WikiTree, it's kind of built on the principle of Wikipedia, where anybody can put information in and update it. They're letting people create a single family tree. Like on Ancestry, everybody creates their own tree. So you may have 50 different family trees with the same person in each one. Whereas WikiTree, there's only one person on the tree. So my great-grandfather would only be on there one time, and everybody can edit it, which is kind of good and bad. One thing WikiTree is good about, though, is they require people to put in as much documentation as they can for any facts on there. And other people can put notes, too, and say, I don't believe what this person wrote is correct because I have this file at home that shows this. And so that's a really good resource. Afrogenius.com is a website specifically for African American heritage. There's message boards on there where people that are researching the same family branches can try to connect with each other. Another site that I really like if you have early pioneers in the South, like if your relatives moved to Alabama in 1830 or 1840 or Tennessee, is the glowrecords.blm.gov. That's Government Land Office records and Bureau of Land Management. Back in that time period, the states were wanting people to move into those states, so they would give land grants to people, and all you had to do was apply for them, and they didn't cost very much money. You could get like 80 acres for $100. And if you go to this website, you can punch in your ancestor's name or just punch in the surname, see if anybody from your family comes up in a particular county where you know they lived at. And you can not only get the information on the land exactly where it was, the GlowRecords.blm.gov website will actually show you a Google map of where the land is located. And you also, there's another tab you can click that'll show you the original land grant document. And before, I believe it's 1834, the president's signature on that is actually the president. He actually had to sign all the land grants that came through his office until 1834 when they realized it was just taking up too much time because it was hundreds of them a day almost he had signs. So that's interesting. You can also take that Google map information that they give you and open up Google Maps in a separate window and go to the satellite view, and you can actually see the land the way it looks today where your relative lived at. Sometimes you'll notice that the shape of the land, whether it's like a rectangle with a little piece cut out of it or something, that the way it looked back then is still the way it looks now. It's just been passed down from family to family.
And
Not,
David, you found some good examples with your own family using that site, haven't you?
yeah. And it really helps you to, if you look at Google Maps too, once you figure out where your family lived at in a certain area, just browse the area and just look at the place names. A lot of times you'll find streets and roads that are named after ancestors. My own Jones relatives married into the Cross family in South Carolina. And when I tracked down the area they lived in, there's several roads over there that are named after the Joneses and the Crosses. There's a Cross Highway and a Jones Cross Bridge, things like that. So it kind of gives you an idea of place and where people lived at. Let's see, Google Maps, that's kind of what I was already going over on Google Maps. Google itself is really good to find information outside of Ancestry and some of these other websites. If you take an ancestor's name and put it in quotes, I don't know if you know about a Boolean search is what that's called, but if you put a name in quotes, Google will only search for exactly that name. So if you're looking for one of my relatives, Richard Pounders, which is kind of an odd name, it doesn't come up very much. It'll only bring up pages that have Richard Pounders in it instead of a page that has Richard Jones and John Pounders, and it just has those two names on the page somewhere. It'll look for that exact phrase of Richard Pounders. And so when you do that, almost any page that comes up is about him. And it'll be other people that have done a family tree on them. If there's any historical records his name appears in, that'll show up. FamilyTreeMagazine.com is another good website. We have Family Tree Magazine actually available in the library. It's probably available electronically in the library as well, where you wouldn't even have to come in to check it out. You could just download it from our website, look at it on a phone or anything like that. But if you go to their website too, they have all their back articles on there. You can read, and you can learn a lot about kind of stuff I'm talking about, like the method of how you do research and what websites are good to go to. They help you out with all that. Wikipedia, sometimes you can find your ancestors on Wikipedia. I've got a few, some of my mom's relatives that were in Alabama, like one of them was not only one of the first people to move into a particular county there, but he founded a church there. And the church dates all the way back to the 1830s. And so there's actually a Wikipedia article in it that mentions his name in it. So if you don't already know that information, you can be surprised sometimes. Like, hey, I didn't know my great-great-grandfather founded a church in Alabama. Cindy'sList.com. That's a real good website to yank my earpiece out here. But Cindy'sList.com gives you information about kind of what I'm going over here, like different websites you can go to find information, but she'll list it all the way down to a county and a city level. Like if you know most of your relatives were living in a particular county in New York, you can just go to her page, go to New York, click that county, and she'll tell you everything that's known about that county, whether any of the courthouses ever burned down, which is, believe it or not, that's actually a really common thing in the late 1800s. Courthouses just burned down left and right, and you lost all sorts of records. So if you're not finding a marriage record for a particular county for your relatives, that could be why the courthouse could have burned down. The record's just lost. But that's where you can start looking in other sources like newspapers and things. Sometimes you can still figure that out. Let's see, state archives and university websites. A lot of state archives and also universities like University of Georgia, places like that have their own unique collections of information. They'll have old newspapers they've scanned in. They'll sometimes have historical documents like up in Tennessee. I found out recently, one of my relatives, there's a box of just loose papers in their catalog, and they have all the stuff written down as to what the loose papers are. And one of them is 3 or 4 letters that one of my great grandparents wrote to another great grandparent. And I don't know what's in the letters, and I'll probably have to write them and tell them to photocopy it and send it to me. And they usually charge like $20 for do that for you, but that's a whole lot cheaper and easier than me driving up to Tennessee and looking for it myself. So, but most of the university websites have got, they have a really handy website that you can just go in, find the historical information. Sometimes they have a genealogy page already set up on their website to make it easy. So always check that out in all the states that your relatives could have lived in. All right. Okay, book-a-librarian appointments. These are a little more difficult now because of the pandemic. They have to be over a Zoom, a Google Meet connection like we're doing here today. When the pandemic's not going on, you can actually come in the library and just talk to a librarian about genealogy or any other topic you're interested in. And it doesn't cost anything. It's free to do. There's a form you fill out on our website. And you just put your name in there and just tell them what you're interested in learning about, and they'll try to match you up with a librarian that knows about the topic you're interested in. I've done several of those for genealogy, and I always enjoy them. It's a lot of fun for me. And I just sit down with the patron, and we both have laptops, and they tell me who they're looking for, and we start digging through Ancestry. And since I've done it for years, I know all the little tricks about where to go to on the website and what to look for, and kind of help them out and also teach them how to use Ancestry at the same time. So that's something you can definitely do if you want to get a head start. Just do a book-a-librarian appointment.
And like David said, right now we're offering them virtually. So if you have a computer at home, preferably with a webcam so we can see each other, he can walk you through the steps in finding all the different pages he talked about, as well as how he uses the resources to really narrow down information. But hopefully in the near future, we'll be opening up in-person book-a-librarians again.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me right now?
Okay, it sounds kind of faint.
We can hear you, Linda, but I think since you all are in the same room, it kind of gives us a
Gotcha.
back.
Gotcha. So what I was saying was we are offering book librarian services virtually at the moment, and preferably if you have a webcam, that would be ideal. So we can see one another, and David can, if you want to work with David specifically, he can walk you through the steps online, and you can actually share your screen with him if that's something you'd like to do, where you can see each other's screen and kind of go back and forth with the research. So it's a really good option if you really want to dig into your family's past. All right. Next slide.
Yes. Okay, so there's basically 3 types of DNA research that helps with genealogy. Usually what you're going to run into with Ancestry and 23andMe, there's one other big one I can't think of the name of right now, but those use autosomal DNA. And I don't know what autosomal means. I'm not that deep into the science of it. But autosomal can give you an idea of your ethnicity and where your ancestors were from back to about 7 generations, 6 to 7 or so. And like I said, that's mostly what you're going to run into on Ancestry. It's really good for identifying cousins, figuring out lost family connections. The other 2 they cost more to run a test. Sometimes you can get a bundle where they do autosomal X and Y DNA. X, I believe that's the male chromosome. That one only traces your surname basically, but it can go back several hundred years. Y-DNA follows the mother's line, and that one goes back thousands of years. You can't really identify particular people through it, but they can follow your Y-DNA back 7,000 years to when you were hunter-gatherers in Central Europe or something like that. So that can be really interesting. I haven't done that myself because it's not really useful when you're just trying to pin down individual family members that lived here in the United States back in the 1700s. Doesn't really help with that. And the X chromosome does help with that, but like I said, it only works on the surname. And if you already got your surname pretty much figured out like I do, there's no reason for me to pay extra money for that. So what can DNA not tell you? DNA is not going to instantly tell you who your ancestors are when you get it. If you send a sample in to Ancestry, it takes about 6 weeks or so to get the results back. Basically, all you do is you spit into a little tube, seal it up, put your name on it, register the number that's on the bottle with Ancestry's website, and then just mail it off to them. It's real simple to do. It just takes a few minutes. And like I said, you wait about 6 weeks, and you'll get an email saying your results are in. And it's really exciting when you first open it up. The first thing they're going to tell you is the breakdown of your ethnicity. Don't completely trust that. It's kind of an infant science. It's not real definite. It's basically true. Like if they tell you that you're 50% European, 30% African, and what am I doing in math here? 20% from Asia. That's probably basically about right, and you'll know if it's right just based on what you know about your own family. Then they can sometimes break it down even further, and that Ancestry has mine broken down to about 43% Scottish, and the rest is English and Irish, I believe. And that basically matches exactly what I've found in my own research too. But it does change from time to time. They'll update the algorithms they use to calculate that kind of stuff. Mine used to have German in it and something else in a smaller percentage. And the last time they updated, all that disappeared and my Scottish went up a lot. Let's see. It's also not going to tell you immediately who your ancestors are. A lot of people just take the test and they think they're just going to go on Ancestry and immediately it's going to tell them who all the relatives are. It doesn't work that way. You have to help them out a little bit. You have to build a family tree, and also you have to connect it to your DNA sample that you send them with just a press of a button, basically. But a lot of people seem to forget that step for some reason. But once you do that and you fill in the tree as much as you know, then they can start running their computers and looking for cousins that you have that you match with on DNA and see if their family tree that they've created matches any of the names in your tree. And then they can start identifying people. Then they do a pretty good job at it. Sometimes I think when I first got my sample and clicked on that screen, it had me back 7 generations on a lot of the branches. But you have to be careful because the information is only accurate as what you've put in and the other person have put in. It's 100% guaranteed according to the DNA that your cousin is, this person that you're connecting with on there. But whether their information they've put in their tree is correct and whether yours is correct, you both may have the wrong information that you've just copied out of some book somewhere, and then it's going to tell you that, hey, your 7th great-grandfather was so-and-so, but that may not actually be true because that's just based on faulty research. So you still got to do some research in there. But what it does really help you with, though, is verifying that information. A lot of people claim that one of my ancestors was a Charles Lane, and that's all based on bad information. And Ancestry will try to tell you that in the tree, but if you actually start looking at your cousins and seeing which other cousins they're related to, there's a way you can kind of triangulate that. It's kind of detailed. I can't go into it, how to do it in this little brief introduction here. But you can find other cousins that are related to you that you didn't know about and identify who their ancestor is. And if you start seeing a name that pops up several times, then you know that that person's probably your true ancestor, not the person that everyone else is claiming. On that Charles Lane, like if I look at his children and people descended from them, I don't have any good DNA matches with any of them. Most research seems to point out that my ancestor was actually William Lane. And so if I changed in my tree and put in William Lane and his kids, all of a sudden I have a lot of really good matches on there, real high percentages of DNA with modern descendants of that person. And like I said, that does match the research I've done too. So I'm about 100% sure that that's definitely my relative and not this Charles Lane guy that everybody claims. It just doesn't add up. Let's see if anything else on DNA here. Oh, also DNA, it's going to open up a lot of new mysteries for you. You'll run into what's called an MPE, a non-parental event. That's where, like, I have one of those in my own tree. I have a great grandmother on my mom's side that there was always like some rumors in the family about something. We never really could figure out what happened. And when I started looking at my cousins on the DNA, found out that almost every single person on that side of the tree that I thought I was related to, I don't have any cousins related to me through them. But I do have a bunch of really close cousins from another family that lived in that same county, in the same community. So something happened there. Can't quite figure it out yet. I'm still digging into that, doing some research. You'll find tons of cousins that you're not sure how they're related to you. You'll look in their tree and it's obvious that they have ancestors that lived in the same area that your ancestor lived in, but none of the names seem to add up. It's just a mystery you got to solve. Start digging through it, doing some research. Sometimes you'll run into people that you should be related to, but you're not sure why they're showing up in your DNA. One of the families on my mom's side, I know who I'm related to in that family, but I'm also finding cousins from that person's brother. And back, I should definitely have cousins from that family, but that's so far back that it really shouldn't show up in my DNA, and I can't figure out why it is. So that's just a little mystery I gotta dig into. Something else to watch out for when you're looking at your tree through DNA is that if you have a person that married a second time, until you really flesh your tree out really good and start matching up a lot of cousins, ancestry a lot of times will automatically think that you're related to the person's second marriage. And that's because any kids they had, half of their DNA is going to be from that mother. Like I have an example of that in my family where the mother got married twice because her first husband died, and he's the one that I'm descended from. But he didn't have very many children. He only had one child before he died. So I have tons of cousins from the second marriage. And since I share DNA with the mother of my family and these other people, ancestry initially just automatically assumed that the second husband was my grandparent. Now that threw me for a loop when I first got into DNA and didn't realize how it all worked. I was like, oh my gosh, my mom's maiden name's completely wrong. But once I started filling in the tree and identifying more cousins and seeing how they're related to me, then Ancestry automatically changed the tree, and they're like, oh yeah, the surname here is correct. So that's the other thing about it. When you actually start doing the DNA and the family tree, try to fill it in as completely as you can. Fill in your ancestors' children, their children. And Ancestry makes that really easy. You can just add people with the click of a button, which is good and bad. Makes it easy to add people. It makes it also easy to add bad information if somebody has the wrong children in the tree. But you just, like I say, just try to research as best you can, make sure it's accurate before you add it to your own tree. I think that's about all I got, but like we're saying about the book librarians, anything like that, just come in the library, talk to one of us about it, and we can help you get started. We can point you to the right books in the library. We have a small collection of Gwinnett census records and Gwinnett histories if you have any local Gwinnett relatives, and we also have just some general books on genealogy about how to get started, how to do research on the computer. And like I said, we're always here to help you with that too. Well, I think that's it.
Great, thanks, David. We'll open it up now for questions. If anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, we just want to thank you all again for all the great information.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Thank you, David and Linda. You've always been a big supporter of us in Snellville, so we really do appreciate our continued partnership with you all. I'd just like to take this time for anyone that may be a Gwinnett resident that might have joined us today. Thank you for being here with us. If you're interested in receiving your first complimentary meal from McKinley Mills, if you reach out to me at mckinleyga.com, you'll be able to find out all of our resources and connections and tools that we do offer for our caregivers. And just thank you for being a part of it and continuing to grow with us along the way.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.